Hello, everyone. Dr. Stillman here again with Jim Laird. We are coming to you live today, and we are going to be talking to you about the importance of habits, consistency, expectations, and cognitive flexibility. And the quote of the day is, "We are the sum of our actions, and therefore our habits make all the difference." This is one of my favorite quotes from the philosopher Aristotle. And the topic today was inspired by this podcast I called Building the Elite. If you like good podcasts, check out their podcast. They have a really incredible book as well that I actually recommend to people. And people who don't know what they are a podcast, or rather a service that focuses on training men who are going into special forces or special operations. And so I wanted to talk to Jim today about the importance of expectations and cognitive flexibility, which was their podcast episode. And Jim and I struggle with this with our people all the time, which is that people have very, very, very high expectations of themselves. And often they have unrealistic expectations based on their strategy. And cognitive flexibility is about being willing to change your mental model and mental map of the world, learn from your experiences, change your strategy, and also accept when things don't go the way that you want them to go. So, Jim, we do this all the time. We talk about this all the time, although we don't really talk about talking about it all the time.
It's a play on words.
I know.
I just don't think people realize, in order to have exceptional results, how mundane and how unexciting that is. Even with health, the things you need to do to be healthy are not exciting. They're not flashy. It's a combination of habits that are done consistently daily over a period of months, years. And the opposite of that is true. Being unhealthy is the combination of bad habits done over years. And some people have the ability to do more bad habits for longer and get away with a lot more than other people do. And that's just kind of how the world works. You've got that curve, right? You've got your upward tail, where no matter what these people do, your Dennis Rodmans, your Keith Richards, your people that can, Dennis Rodman could drink all night and then go play in an NBA playoff game and be an all-star MVP. Keith Richards, tons of drug abuse. People like Ozzy Osbourne, who have destroyed their body for decades and is still, living. He's not in the greatest shape now, but he's lived to 80 despite, massive physical abuse. And then you've got the people on the other end who relatively don't do anything and are just sick. And then you got these people in the middle that are kind of, waving back and forth. So, people, a lot of people get upset with me because I talk about a lot of the same things over and over again. And if you listen to a lot of podcasts I've done with my clients over the years, they'd be like, man, we'd come into the gym and Jim would just talk about the same thing over and over again. Or we're on a call. I remember we're on a call here recently with somebody, and I was like, well, what about this? Well, I know that. Well, what about this? Well, I know that. Well, what about this? Well, I know that, and I know that, and I know that. Well, I'm like, well, are you actually doing them? No. So, there's a big disconnect between knowledge and actual application. And most people they might know it, but they're not actually doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the most important things about this, as far as expectations go, is that I had a friend who used to say, happiness equals reality divided by expectations, by which he meant, the higher your expectations and then the worse your reality, the more miserable you're going to be. And a lot of people have these expectations about their health that are unrealistic. They are shaped by the narratives in the media, shaped by the narratives in the conventional health and wellness world, shaped by the narratives of doctors, clinics, and all these different actors in the healthcare sector, many of which have perverse incentives to not treat patients well, to get them on the medication train, constantly taking meds, constantly popping, never-ending array of supplements, constantly coming back for visits. Really, the healthcare sector and system there's not a lot of incentive to empower people to be well. It's one of the most challenging things about what you and I do, because we'll lose clients, in your case, patients in mine, when we're really radically honest with them about what we think is going to happen for them, based on the strategy that they're employing and their expectations for that strategy, right? So a classic example of this would be somebody who comes in doesn't want to take the time, doesn't want to put in the effort, doesn't want to put in the work of being well, doesn't want to implement healthy habits, doesn't want to change their lifestyle. We respect when people have certain things in their life that they didn't anticipate happening, right? Deaths in the family, unexpected illnesses, having to go out on a limb for friends, family, having to raise kids on your own because of an unexpected death, divorce, a parent that lost their mind. Any of these things we've seen, over the years, taking care of people, or in Jim's case, coaching people, is much the same thing. And the reality is that, though, that we really do want to be frank and honest with people about the fact that if they don't change their strategies on a fundamental level to the most optimal for creating health and well-being, then invariably they're going to be disappointed with the outcomes and the reality that they get. And they have to be cognitively flexible enough to change their strategies, change their expectations, and cope with what is invariably the stress of disappointment from different strategies not working out. Because even when you and I give the patient the best advice, the best information, and they execute it well, sometimes we're still left with frustration and with a lack of results. And a lot of doctors, I've noticed, and a lot of wellness influencers don't talk about this. They just talk about the newest shiny object. They just talk about the newest, most interesting study. But the reality of getting people well, keeping people well, really actually working with real people in the real world is that you're constantly managing expectations, and you're constantly asking questions of, why is this not working the way we want it to? What is the most important next step? How big of a therapeutic value will we get from anything? Ashwagandha, TRT, bioidentical hormones, sunlight, walking outside 3 times a day. I mean, any of these things, there's an upside, there's a downside, there's a risk, there's a benefit. And this is the battle that we, fight. It feels like a fight a lot of the time with people, is trying to help get them into a realistic set of expectations and a realistic lifestyle that's going to work for them and going to get the results that they want. And one of the most important things that we impress on people is that modern life's tearing you away from the things that are building up your health. And that's one of the most important things that, we have to be real with you about, because people who are not explaining that to you in a blunt, frank way, we don't see them getting the results, quite honestly, that a lot of them talk about getting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's we have to make almost deliberate choices in our life now between being sucked into the modern life meat grinder, which has a lot of benefits as far as like not actually having to do work and things like that. You're not doing manual labor on a farm and all those sort of things, but it also has consequences, trade-offs, where, your circadian rhythm is messed up, you're emotionally, you're mentally distressed, you're addicted to dopamine, you're addicted to your phone, so in the future, we're going to have to make conscious choices of, I'm going to find a way to get better food. I'm going to make sure that I manage the technology so that it doesn't own me. I'm going to make the effort to do manual labor, walk outside, do yard work. I'm going to commit to these things, and I'm going to focus on the process instead of focusing on the end goal. I'm going to focus on the things that I need to do to achieve those things, and actually enjoying the process and the discomfort, honestly, of the monotony of doing the basics over and over and over again.
Right. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is that they underestimate the value of fundamental daily habits, which is why we started with the quote that we started with, because it's hard to believe that things that are so seemingly inconsequential could be more important and impactful than something really dramatic and intense, like, say, a high intensity interval training session. We see so many people coming to us, and it was funny, the other day we were in the gym and we saw a bunch of people going into a HIIT class, and you said, Leland, watch, every single person who walks into that HIIT class is going to be overweight. And you were right. And people will say, oh, well, look, the HIIT class attracts the people who want to lose weight because it's HIIT, and that's the whole goal. But you said, look, here's the reality, speaking from the perspective of someone who's been training people for almost the better part of certainly the better part of 3 decades now. When you get into that HIIT environment, the stress really has a negative effect on your hormones, a negative effect on your autonomics. It wrecks your HRV. It can ruin your sleep. And that's why when people will adopt this strategy with the expectation that the HIIT training, and this is just one example, right, is going to be the solution to their weight or their energy or their body composition, when in fact it becomes part of their problem, because there's a disconnect between their expectations and reality. The expectation is because this is dramatic, because it's intense, because it's miserable, because they hurt, pain is weakness leaving the body, no pain, no gain. Because it fits into a lot of these mainstream narratives, it must be the solution, when in fact you and I will see people come into the program and work out less, eat more, sleep more, and gain muscle mass, lose dress sizes, lose inches, feel better, and have more energy. And yet we made their life simpler and not more complicated. And that's really, frankly, why we do what we do, is because we're able to get those kinds of results.
Well, if you take somebody, there's nothing wrong with throwing HIIT in from time to time for people. The problem is with your only tool in the toolbox, most people are not prepared metabolically or physiologically to handle those sort of stresses. So that class becomes a survival thing for about 80% of the people in the class, instead of starting with building a foundation and doing some low to moderate intensity stuff, preparing the body through good movement, building strength so they can actually apply a lot of real force in those classes. And then they tend to be too long, when you're doing high effort things like sprinting and things like that, if it can last for 45 minutes to an hour, then it's not intense enough, right? And most of the general population today is nowhere that has the general physical preparedness to handle any kind of high intensity work. It's just exciting, music is loud, and people are high-fiving each other and all that sort of thing. And of course, it's going to work for some people, and it's not going to work for others. And then there's a group in the middle that kind of struggles. But most of these people, it's like I spoke at Paleo FX. I think that's where I met Jack Bruce. But one of my speech was, using exercise to try and solve a lifestyle problem is like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs to be stitched. And that's a lot of people are trying to fix a modern lifestyle through high intensity exercise. And it doesn't end well for most people.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and yet their expectations are otherwise. And that's why we'll see people who are doing HIIT training, they're overdoing it, working out too hard, they're not resting enough, they're not working in enough compared to how much they're working out.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with hard training if you're prepared for it. And if you dose it right? Just like anything, like if you take the right dose for the right period of time, everything has its place, right? And I used to have a sign on the exit of my gym that said the real work starts now. They come in and train 3 hours, usually 3 hours. Most people train me 2 to 3 times a week. So they're with me for 2.5, 3 hours. But I would tell them everything that you do once you leave the gym affects the ability for what you can do in here. And that's where a lot of people don't understand. And they kind of lose it. They're like, oh, I'm going to work hard here in the gym. And then they don't understand that everything they do, the sleep, the walking outside, the eating good food, allows them to get more out of the gym. So the work that needs to be done, my friend Joel Jameson, who is, an expert on metabolic conditioning, especially for MMA athletes, he talks about, it takes so much more discipline to go to sleep at a decent hour, to not be drinking alcohol late at night. It's so much easier to go out with your friends than it is to get in bed at a decent hour, to eat different, that's true discipline. So a lot of people forget about that end of things, and they just focus on the fun, exciting part, right?
Right. And the other thing that we run into with people is that they're expecting 30-year-old results from a 50-year-old or 60 or 70-year-old body. I could just as well say they're expecting 18-year-old results from a 30-year-old body. Many of them don't have an appreciation for the underlying changes in their physiology that are taking place, in many cases irrevocably and, what's the word I'm looking for, unavoidably with aging. And the strategies they're employing later in life to get the same results they were able to get with those strategies 20 or 30 years earlier are not working for them. A lot of them need to permanently revise their expectations. And this is one reason why we see the bioidentical hormone industry taking off at such an incredible pace in 2023. I mean, 5, 10, 15 years ago, not that many people were doing it. Now it's like, it feels like every corner has a HRT clinic on it. There's a lot of reasons for that, which I won't get into right now. But one of the number one reasons is that you cannot get 20-year-old results without 20-year-old levels of hormones. And the only way to do that as you get older, as you go through menopause, for men as you go through andropause, is to use supplemental hormones. And we see many, many men, in our practice with low or sub normal, low normal, I should say, testosterone levels, which is a whole other story. And what we see in these men is that they're worn down by their work. Their sleep is disrupted by any number of different things. They're tired. They're fatigued. They don't get enough sunlight. They're not doing enough in the way of exercise. Many of them are going to the gym and they're substituting intensity for duration. And then they wonder why they're burned out and tired because their workouts are insane. Many of them are driving terrible biomechanics with their workouts, which are putting them on track to disable themselves at an early age. And helping clue them into all of these failed strategies or failing strategies and unrealistic expectations is one of the most important things that we do. Because if no one really talks to them about what their reality is at 45 versus 25, and what we see overwhelmingly in the TRT and that's testosterone replacement therapy and HRT, hormone replacement therapy worlds, is that many practitioners, it's just a simple matter of, okay, your level's low, we're going to start you on this dose and increase you to this dose, and we'll recheck you in 3 to 4 months. And that's going to get your hormones into a good place, but it's not going to fix underlying dietary and lifestyle patterns that are causing these dysfunctions of hormonal axes, which is why, with our programs, we don't just throw people on hormones. We actually schedule a lot of time with them to fix their diet, fix their lifestyle, and get to the bottom of why their testosterone may be low, why maybe they're having progesterone drop out as a woman in their 30s that's abnormal and causing dysfunctional uterine bleeding or excessive heavy periods and things like that.
I've always said that one of the best places to open a hormone clinic, and if you go do this, I want a royalty on it, but it's right next to a spinning studio. You got all these women that are, highly stressed and running around with chickens with their head cut off, and they go in and get screamed at for an hour while pedaling on a bike, and then they all go get lattes and cheesecake after. And they wonder why they feel exhausted. So the hormone clinic right next to the spinning studio would be a money printing press machine. So
and young women, teens, 20s, they get away with it because they have the physiologic reserve due to their youth. They can't eat whatever, but they can eat a way wider variety of foods and such than women who are older. And the reason is simply that they have higher levels of hormones no matter what, and B, they have lower heteroplasmy rates, healthier mitochondria. Even if their hormone levels are lower, their body's able to compensate more. And as people get older, the expectation is that resiliency is going to be there. That is not the case. One of the biggest mistakes I see people making 40s, 50s, 60s is that they're planning to have the resiliency of a 30-year-old or a 20-year-old, and the chicken just come home to roost, and all of a sudden they're balancing a very busy career, owning a business, having kids, staying on top of and engaged with and involved with their marriage, and so on and so forth. And they can't do it. They can't do all these things when their health is falling apart on them because they've overcommitted and they've burnt themselves out. Drugs really help people get into this place, and I mean that in the worst possible way. It allows them to basically steal, and you like to use the phrase borrow energy from the future. Basically what they're doing is they're using drugs in order to compensate for fundamental problems in their diet and lifestyle. The drugs are able to mask the problem, but the problem then becomes more and more and more severe under the hood, so to speak. It's like continuing to drive your car when the engine is knocking. If you do that, you're liable to wind up in the shop, and instead of just needing a cheap part that can be replaced overnight, you may need to have your engine completely replaced or rebuilt. And that's where a lot of people come to us at their mid-40s, 50s, and 60s. That's one of the things we caution young people, teens, 20s, 30s. They need to be really careful with their habits because they're setting them up for the health or disease that they're going to have in 5, 10, 20, 15, 30 years.
Well, yeah, our modern life is giving us a set of habits that are not good for our long-term health.
Right.
Whereas 50, 60 years ago, mowing your grass, going outside, spending time with your family, all these things that happen naturally are things that are positive for your health. But, this whole next generation is, developing the TikTok habit and the Instagram habit, and the video game habit, and
really toxic habits,
the pornography habit, and the not having relationships with people. Like relationships are over the phone and via technology, which is great. But, all these habits, not going outside, being indoors 93% of the time, all these things are going to have massive consequences. So, we're going to have to educate people and introduce them to getting some of these habits into their life to substitute for these habits that they've basically been, think about it. We're going to have here in the next 10 years, people that have had a screen in front of them from the time they were 1.5, 2 years old, all the way through. It's never happened. So it's going to be a little crazy, I think, and particularly in the mental health department.
Yeah, and it's no mystery to us why young people today are more depressed, suicidal, and confused than ever before. So I think that's enough for today.
All right, boss.
Thanks, everyone, for watching. Link tree below if you want to find out more about working with us. We've got a weight loss seminar coming up. And we're
speaking at Acapulco this weekend.
On Saturday, yeah. That's also in the link tree as well.
Free.
It's free, yeah. All right, everyone. Take care. Hope you enjoyed this. Leave your comments and questions in the chat below. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.